Friday's meeting between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin is happening in Alaska on American soil. It's one of the most neutral and, more importantly, safe options for Putin. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York with details. And Alex, why did the meeting need to happen in the U.S.?
Well, Holly, Putin is seeking to evade arrest on war crimes charges, and the Russian leader has an outstanding warrant by the International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC. And that means if he enters any of the 125 member nations, he could be arrested. And it's important to note, the United States does not recognize the authority of the ICC. The warrant, issued in 2023, stems from charges Russians forcefully removed Ukrainian children, including from this orphanage in southern Ukraine. It centers largely on charges that he committed war crimes by transferring at least hundreds of children from occupied Ukrainian territory to Russia. The United States is one of a handful of nations who do not recognize the world's highest court, sitting with the likes of countries like Russia, China, India, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Every European and South American nation recognizes the court, as well as Australia.
So just because these countries aren't a member doesn't mean that the acts that their leadership commits can't come under the jurisdiction of the court. However, of course, it has an impact on the political functioning. This is a court that relies on state cooperation to be able to turn suspects over and to be able to carry out investigations, right? So it's always been an impediment to the court's work.
Putin's travel has been limited, as even an emergency landing could land him in prison. Putin did not go to South Africa 2 years ago as he was too afraid of arrest, and he avoided Brazil for another summit this summer. The trip from Moscow to Alaska enables him to avoid the airspace of any country who could conceivably arrest him. He will travel across Russia and over the North Pole and into the United States. Putin isn't the only leader staring down these issues. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have arrest warrants over the current war in Gaza.
There are some leaders that, don't want this as a kind of a stain on their record, on the history, on the retelling of what their legacy is. And then there are others who could simply care less.
Other leaders with arrest warrants include Sudan's former president, accused of crimes against humanity, and a Ugandan warlord, Joseph Kony, infamous for conscripting child soldiers to commit war crimes.
Oh, so interesting, Alex. Okay, so the U.S. doesn't recognize the International Criminal Court, so how much of an impact does that have?
Well, it has a pretty big impact, at least when it comes to the legitimacy of the ICC. It makes it more difficult for them to implement some of these arrest warrants when not just the United States, but countries around the world are not choosing to participate. Now, when I spoke with this human rights lawyer, she told me that this is effectively a low moment for the ICC right now, that she has concerns that the world order is back to pre-1945 levels, meaning that conflict is resolved by war rather than diplomacy, which she says we have really enjoyed in this post-1945 era, especially when it comes to the cherry picking, essentially, that she says that some countries are doing. For example, the United States, even though it doesn't recognize the ICC, it has been happy with some of the things that it does. When you're talking about the arrest warrants that have been issued for leaders in Sudan, even the arrest warrants in the Biden administration that were issued for Trump, for Putin, they were happy about that. And in the Trump administration, while the leadership is not recognizing it, we have seen senators on both sides of the aisle happy with the arrest warrant issued for Putin. But when they don't recognize it, you can see him able to come on American soil and conduct business in a way that he wouldn't necessarily be able to if for some reason the United States did recognize the court.
So then, Alex, what's the likelihood that any of these leaders even make it to a courtroom, particularly if they're not members?
It's unlikely, but when I asked this human rights lawyer, who also was a lawyer for the ICC at one point, I also talked to the founding prosecutor for the ICC this morning, and what they both said is that there's hope for the future, that leadership changes, politics changes, and therefore these arrest warrants, the fact that they have been issued, could change in the future. When we saw the Filipino President Duterte, that he had an arrest warrant issued for him. Obviously, he wasn't going to turn himself in, but when leadership changed in the Philippines, they turned him in. And so there's hope there that it would be the same with some of these other leaders. And also one of the things that I think is also important to note is that when a country is not part of the ICC, in theory, they could not be prosecuted for crimes that happen on their own soil. But if they're committing crimes that are happening on other nations' soil, that is how the ICC believes it has jurisdiction. Just two quick examples with Iran. If you remember that airliner, that Ukrainian airliner that was shot out of the sky, while Iran is not a member nation, Ukraine is. And so they believe they can prosecute under that guise. Similarly, with some crimes that are believed to have committed in Syria, even though Iran and Syria are not member nations, the crimes that the ICC believes Iran committed ended in Jordan, which is a member nation, so therefore the ICC does believe it has jurisdiction over those crimes. So it's complicated, convoluted, difficult for some of these leaders to end up in an ICC courtroom, but the hope is that the ICC believes that one day they might face that kind of justice.
Thank you for that explanation. It's very convoluted, but you made it simple to understand. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller in New York. Thank you, Alex.